I made his coffee. For 6 years, I made Marcus Bellamy's coffee. 2 sugars, 1 cream, served at precisely 8:15 a.m. in a ceramic mug with the Hayes Bellamy Criminal Defense logo that still bore my name, even though I no longer had the right to practice law. I watched him drink it at his mahogany desk in the corner office that used to be mine, while I sat in a windowless paralegal cubicle filing papers I was overqualified to touch, doing work that fresh law school graduates could handle. My 17 years of legal expertise reduced to checking citations and organizing discovery documents. Every morning, as I handed him that coffee with a smile that felt like swallowing glass, I thought about the evidence I'd compiled the night before. Another piece of the puzzle, another thread in the web, another nail in the coffin I was building for the man who'd stolen my entire life. He had no idea that the paralegal making his coffee was the same criminal defense attorney who used to be his partner, the same woman he'd framed and destroyed, the same person who was going to take everything from him the way he'd taken everything from me. My name is Veronica Hayes. I'm 41 years old, and I used to be one of Chicago's most respected criminal defense attorneys, past tense. Because in 2019, I was disbarred for crimes I never committed, while the man who actually committed them took over our law firm, absorbed my client list, and became one of the city's most prominent attorneys, representing high-profile clients and earning millions. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. In 2018, when I still believed the legal system worked. Marcus Bellamy and I had been law partners for 9 years. We'd met at the Cook County Public Defender's Office in 2009, 2 young attorneys grinding through impossible caseloads and learning the brutal reality of criminal defense work. I'd been 28, fresh from Northwestern law, with ideals still intact and a belief that good advocacy could change the system. Marcus was 31, 3 years ahead of me in experience, with a cynical wit that made the darkest cases bearable. We bonded over late nights, prepping trials in windowless conference rooms that smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. We shared frustration with an underfunded public defender system that treated defendants like statistics, where indigent clients got 15 minutes of attention between court appearances. We celebrated wins together, rare, precious victories where actual innocent people went home instead of to prison. We commiserated over losses, which were far more common, where clients we knew were guilty faced sentences that felt disproportionate and cruel. When we opened Hayes Bellamy Criminal Defense in 2010, it felt like a partnership forged in purpose and shared values. We found office space in the Loop, 3 rooms in a building that had seen better decades, with windows that looked out onto Dearborn Street and the kind of water-stained ceiling tiles that spoke to budget constraints. But it was ours. The name on the door was ours. And then the work did there, defending people who couldn't defend themselves. Being the voice for the accused, holding prosecutors to their burden of proof, felt meaningful. I thought we were building something important together, something clean, something that mattered. For 8 years, our firm thrived. I specialized in complex criminal cases, murder trials, white-collar fraud, racketeering charges, cases that required meticulous preparation and aggressive courtroom strategy. The cases nobody else wanted because they were too difficult, too time-consuming, too likely to end in loss. My win rate was 67%, which was exceptional in criminal defense where you're often playing with a losing hand, where your client's guilt isn't a question but the length of their sentence is the only thing you're fighting for. Marcus handled high-profile cases, the kind that generated media attention and wealthy clients willing to pay premium fees. Politicians accused of corruption, business executives facing fraud charges, professional athletes caught up in assault allegations. His win rate was even higher, 74%. I thought he was brilliant. I thought his courtroom presence, his ability to connect with juries, his gift for finding the weakness in a prosecutor's case, was just natural talent combined with experience. I'd seen him work, the way he could take a witness apart on cross-examination, the way he structured closing arguments that made guilty clients sound sympathetic, the way he commanded a courtroom with confidence that bordered on arrogance but never quite crossed the line. I thought I knew him. I thought we were partners in every sense, financially, professionally, ethically. I was wrong about that last part. The first crack in that illusion came in March 2018, and I almost missed it completely. I was reviewing case files for a routine motion Marcus was filing. Standard partner review we did for each other. Nothing unusual, just making sure we hadn't missed procedural issues or citation errors. The case was People vs. Romano, a first-degree murder trial we'd won 6 months earlier with an acquittal that had shocked the legal community. Anthony Romano had been accused of killing his business partner during a dispute over company finances. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Eyewitness testimony from 3 people who'd seen him enter the victim's office building minutes before the murder. Forensic evidence placing his DNA at the scene. Text messages between Romano and the victim showing escalating threats. Financial records showing Romano was embezzling and the victim had discovered it. We should have lost. Most defense attorneys would have pleaded it out, negotiated for manslaughter instead of murder, tried to get 20 years instead of life. But Marcus took it to trial, and through some combination of brilliant strategy and jury sympathy, had secured acquittal. I'd attended part of that trial. I'd watched Marcus's closing argument, a masterpiece of reasonable doubt creation, raising questions about the reliability of eyewitnesses, suggesting alternative suspects, painting Romano as a grieving friend rather than a calculating killer. I'd taken notes on his technique for future reference, but reviewing the case file 6 months later, I found something that made my blood go cold. Tucked into the discovery folder, barely visible between 2 police reports, was a small piece of paper torn from a legal pad, handwritten in Marcus's distinctive scrawl, sharp, angular letters that I'd seen on 1,000 notes over 9 years. Judge Chen, balance due $50, remind him about Romano timeline. I stared at it for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 2 minutes. My brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Judge Chen had presided over the Romano trial. He'd made critical evidentiary rulings that had excluded damaging testimony against our client. He'd given jury instructions that subtly favored the defense. He'd created the conditions that made Marcus's brilliant closing argument even possible. Except maybe it wasn't brilliance. Maybe it was something else. I tried to rationalize it. Legal fees, perhaps, though $50,000 was an oddly specific amount for a fee arrangement, or a loan between friends. Marcus and Judge Chen had known each other for years. I'd seen them at bar association events, talking easily, laughing at inside jokes. Maybe this was personal, not professional. But balance due suggested ongoing payments. And Romano timeline suggested this payment was connected to our case. I told myself I was being paranoid, seeing corruption where there was only collegiality. Marcus had a dark sense of humor. This was probably some joke between him and Chen that I didn't understand. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, because once you see a crack in something you thought was solid, you can't unsee it. Once you question one thing, suddenly everything becomes questionable. So I started looking at other cases Marcus had handled before Judge Chen. Not obviously, I didn't want him to know I was investigating, didn't want to accuse my partner of something this serious without being absolutely certain. I pulled files quietly, reviewed them during lunch hours, made casual queries of our case management system. 12 cases over 3 years. Marcus had tried 12 criminal cases before Judge Chen between 2015 and 2018. He'd won 11 of them. 11 wins out of 12. An 89% win rate. In criminal defense, where even the best attorneys rarely break 70%. I pulled the details on each case. They weren't easy wins. These were cases with serious charges, substantial evidence, prosecutors who were competent and aggressive. These were cases where victory should have been improbable at best, impossible at worst. Case number 1, aggravated assault. Client caught on security camera beating victim. 5 witnesses. Marcus won acquittal. Chen excluded the security footage on a technicality so obscure I'd never heard of it used successfully. Case 2, drug trafficking. Client found with 3 kilos of cocaine in vehicle during traffic stop. Search warrant properly executed. Marcus won dismissal. Chen ruled the traffic stop was pretextual, suppressed all evidence. Case number 3, armed robbery. Victim identified client in lineup. Client's fingerprints on weapon. Marcus won acquittal. Chen allowed defense expert to testify that eyewitness identification was unreliable, excluded fingerprint evidence citing contamination concerns that the forensic team disputed. Case after case, the pattern repeated. Difficult cases that should have been losses transformed into victories by judicial rulings that stretched legal precedent to the breaking point. Always in Marcus's favor, always by Judge Chen. The statistical improbability was staggering. I'd taken enough probability courses in undergrad to know that an 89% win rate in criminal defense, not plea bargains, actual trial victories, was essentially impossible without some external factor. But statistical improbability wasn't proof of corruption. It was just suspicious. And I couldn't accuse my partner, my friend of 9 years, of bribing a judge based on suspicion. I needed to be wrong. I desperately wanted to be wrong. Because if I was right, it meant everything we'd built together was a lie. It meant our firm, our reputation, our shared success, all of it was founded on corruption. It meant Marcus wasn't the skilled attorney I'd admired. He was a criminal who'd weaponized the legal system. It meant I'd been working beside someone who bought justice while I fought for it. The confrontation came on April 19, 2018. I remember the date because it was the day everything I believed about my partner, my firm, and my profession shattered into pieces I would spend 6 years trying to reassemble. The office was empty, except for us. The Chicago skyline glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of what I still thought of as our conference room. I laid out the case files on the table, the note placed carefully on top. "Marcus, we need to talk about this." He looked at the note. His expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten, a micro-expression I'd learned to read in 9 years of partnership. Nervousness masked as casual dismissal. "It's a joke, V. Chen and I have a running bet about trial outcomes. It's nothing. A $50,000 bet? Private joke, you know how it is." "I really don't, because I've been looking at your cases before Judge Chen, and the pattern is concerning. 11 wins out of 12 cases. Most of them with evidence that should have convicted. How do you explain that?" His eyes went cold. It was like watching a mask slip, seeing something alien and calculating beneath the friendly colleague I thought I knew. "I explain it by being a damn good attorney, which you should understand considering your own win rate. Are you really questioning my ethics because I'm successful? That's insulting, Veronica." "I'm questioning a handwritten note about paying a judge $50,000. Which I just explained was a joke. Are we done here? Because I have a motion to file tomorrow, and unlike you, I don't have time for paranoid witch hunts." He walked out, leaving the case files scattered across the table. I stood there for a long time, my hands shaking, knowing with absolute certainty that he was lying. I should have been more careful about what I did next. I should have understood that Marcus Bellamy didn't get an 89% win rate by being careless or leaving loose ends. I started documenting everything. Every case before Judge Chen. Every pattern of suspicious wins. I contacted the Illinois State Bar's ethics hotline anonymously, asking hypothetical questions about reporting suspected judicial bribery. I began compiling a formal complaint that would include evidence, dates, statistical analysis. I thought I was being methodical. Professional, following the rules. Marcus was being strategic, and he was 4 steps ahead of me. The bar complaint arrived via certified mail on June 12, 2018. I opened it in my office, expecting routine correspondence, maybe a notice about continuing legal education requirements. Instead, I found 23 pages detailing ethics violations I'd allegedly committed. The complaint was filed by Marcus Bellamy against his partner, Veronica Hayes, alleging 1. Solicitation of bribes from clients, fabricated emails showing me requesting $25,000 from 3 clients for favorable outcomes. 2. Overbilling clients, altered billing records suggesting I'd charged for work never performed, inflating hours on 15 cases. 3. Leaking confidential client information to prosecutors, forged documents showing me sharing privileged information with the Cook County State's attorney. Each allegation was supported by evidence I'd never seen. Emails from my account I'd never written. Billing records with my signature on fraudulent time entries. Documents with my electronic signature authorizing disclosure of privileged information. It was a masterpiece of fabrication. Thorough, Convincing, damning, and completely false. I called Marcus immediately. His voice was sympathetic, concerned, perfectly calibrated to sound like a worried partner rather than the architect of my destruction. "V, I just heard. This is insane. You know I'll support you through this. We'll fight it together." "You filed it, Marcus. Your name is right here as the complainant." "I had to. The evidence came to light during a routine case review. I'm required by bar rules to report suspected misconduct. You know that. But Veronica, I don't believe you actually did this. Someone must have planted evidence. We'll prove it." His words were so reasonable, so supportive, and so utterly hollow. "You framed me. That's the paranoia talking. Listen, get yourself a good defense attorney. Take a few days off. We'll figure this out." He hung up before I could respond. I sat in my office, the office I'd occupied for 8 years, surrounded by diplomas and case victories and the remnants of a career I'd built from nothing, and understood with crushing clarity that my life was about to implode. The Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission investigation was swift and brutal. They seized my case files. They interviewed my clients, most of whom had no idea what was happening, and became immediately suspicious of their own attorney. They examined my billing records, which Marcus had carefully altered over months of planning. The forensic evidence was sophisticated. The fabricated emails came from my IP address. Marcus had accessed my computer when I wasn't in the office. The altered billing records had my digital signature, which he'd copied from legitimate documents. The leaked client information appeared to come from my secure file server, which Marcus had access to as partner. I hired the best defense attorney I could afford, Catherine Wu, a former federal prosecutor who specialized in attorney ethics cases. She believed me, which was more than most people did, but she also understood the problem. "Veronica, the evidence against you is compelling. Fabricated, yes, but proving fabrication is incredibly difficult. We'd need to show Marcus had motive, opportunity, and technical ability to plant this evidence. We'd need to prove a conspiracy. Meanwhile, he's filed a bar complaint that appears legitimate on its face. He's bribing judges, Catherine. That's the motive. I was going to report him. Can you prove the bribery?" "Not yet. I was still compiling evidence when he struck." She was quiet for a moment. "Then we're fighting a defensive battle. And in bar proceedings, the burden of proof is lower than criminal trials. They don't need beyond reasonable doubt. They need preponderance of evidence. Right now, the evidence preponderates heavily against you. I spent $600,000 fighting the disbarment. I mortgaged my condo. I depleted my retirement accounts." Catherine fought brilliantly, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial, that someone could have framed me, but the timing was suspicious given my investigation into Marcus. But without proof of Marcus's corruption, it sounded like desperate deflection. And Marcus testified at my hearing with perfect composure, his voice heavy with regret. "I trusted Veronica completely. We were partners, friends. Discovering she'd betrayed that trust, betrayed our clients, it devastated me. But I had an ethical obligation to report suspected misconduct. I wish I'd been wrong." The hearing committee deliberated for 8 hours. On November 3, 2018, they issued their ruling. Disbarment, effective immediately, pending any appeals. I'd been a licensed attorney for 17 years. My entire adult life had been built around practicing law, and in one afternoon, it was gone. The appeals process took another year and cost me everything I had left. My marriage collapsed. My husband couldn't handle the shame and financial stress, couldn't look at me without seeing failure. We divorced in 2020. My father, also an attorney, stopped returning my calls. He believed I was guilty, and that betrayal hurt almost as much as Marcus's. The Illinois Supreme Court upheld my disbarment in December 2019. I was officially not an attorney. I was nobody. Marcus, meanwhile, absorbed our shared client list. He rebranded as Bellamy Criminal Defense, kept the office space, hired new associates, and flourished. By 2020, he was representing NBA players, politicians, and corporate executives. His face appeared on billboards around Chicago. He gave legal commentary on local news. He was living the career that should have been mine. And I was applying for paralegal positions. The job market for disbarred attorneys is worse than you'd imagine. Law firms wouldn't hire me. I was radioactive, a cautionary tale. Corporate legal departments saw my resume and immediately rejected me. I couldn't even get interviews for compliance positions. Desperate, humiliated, and nearly broke, I applied to small firms that might overlook my history if I came cheap enough. In March 2019, I was hired as a paralegal at Chen & Associates, a personal injury firm in Evanston. They paid me $48,000 a year, less than I'd made as a first-year associate out of law school, a fraction of the $290,000 I'd earned as a partner. My supervisor was 26 years old with 3 years of legal experience. She assigned me tasks fresh law school graduates could handle: organizing discovery documents, checking citations, filing motions, scheduling depositions. I had a law degree from Northwestern. I'd tried over 100 cases. I'd argued before the Illinois Supreme Court, and I was making coffee for attorneys who still struggled with basic evidence rules. Every morning felt like swallowing broken glass. But something interesting happened in that paralegal cubicle, sitting among first-year associates and legal assistants who had no idea I'd once been their equal. I had access. Paralegals have legitimate access to court records, filing systems, case databases. Everything a practicing attorney can access, a paralegal can too. We just can't represent clients or give legal advice. And I had time, so much time. 8 hours a day doing work that required maybe 3 hours of my actual brain power, which left 5 hours a day to research Marcus Bellamy. I started slowly. Court records for his cases, published opinions, docket sheets. Everything was public information, accessed through my paralegal login, completely legitimate work-related research. The pattern I'd noticed in 2018 had gotten worse. Marcus's win rate before Judge Chen was now 91%. Before other judges, it was 34%. Exactly what you'd expect from a criminal defense attorney handling difficult cases. But 91% before one judge? That wasn't skill. That was corruption. I made a spreadsheet. 47 cases over 9 years. 43 wins. Each one a statistical anomaly. Each one representing thousands of dollars in legal fees, millions in reputation and career advancement. But proving corruption required more than statistics. I needed evidence, real, tangible documentation of money changing hands. I couldn't afford a private investigator, not on a paralegal salary while still paying down legal debt from my disbarment fight. But I could afford $500 a month. So I hired Jorge Martinez, a retired Chicago PD detective who'd started doing PI work and was willing to accept payment plans from a desperate former attorney. "You understand this could take years?" Jorge said during our first meeting at a Starbucks near my apartment. He was in his 60s, weathered and skeptical, but his eyes sharpened when I showed him the case statistics. "I have time. 6 hours a day of my brain going unused. I can be patient. Why not just let it go? Move on." Because he didn't just take my career. He took my identity. He took my name. Our firm was Hayes Bellamy. He took my clients, my office, my reputation. He took my life and wore it like a costume. And he did it by framing me for crimes he committed. That's not something you let go. Jorge studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, let's destroy him." For 4 years, 2020 through 2023, I lived a double life. By day, I was the quiet paralegal who made coffee, filed motions, and kept her head down. By night, I was a hunter building a case against the man who destroyed me. Jorge tracked Marcus's movements. We identified patterns: monthly meetings with Judge Chen, disguised as lunch appointments, cash withdrawals from Marcus's accounts that matched dates before important rulings, Judge Chen's wife depositing unusual amounts into their personal account, amounts that matched Marcus's withdrawals, offset by just enough time to obscure the connection. I befriended court clerks. Diane Rodriguez worked filing at the criminal courts building and noticed the same patterns I had. Judge Chen's unusual favoritism toward Marcus's cases. She started documenting it independently, timestamping motions and rulings, noting which cases got preferential hearing schedules. "It's not just the wins," Diane told me over coffee in 2021. "It's how he wins. Marcus files a motion, Chen grants it within 24 hours. Other attorneys wait weeks. Marcus requests an extension, Chen approves it automatically. It's systematic favoritism." The evidence accumulated slowly. Painfully slowly. Every month I added another piece. Bank records obtained through creative use of public information laws, witness testimony from people Jorge tracked down, pattern analysis that grew more damning with each case. In 2022, we found the witnesses. Not just evidence of payments. Actual human beings. Marcus had paid to commit perjury in trials that had destroyed families and perverted justice. Jorge located them through old case files and patient investigation, cross-referencing names from trial transcripts with financial records we'd painstakingly assembled. It took months of tracking, following leads that dead-ended, knocking on doors where nobody answered. The first witness was Dennis Cooper. He'd testified in a 2016 murder trial, providing the alibi that got Marcus's client, Raymond Pierce, acquitted of killing his ex-girlfriend. Dennis had sworn under oath that Pierce was with him the entire evening, watching a Bulls game at Dennis's apartment. Couldn't possibly have been at the victim's house, strangling her to death. Jorge found Dennis working at a warehouse in Gary, Indiana, 40 miles from Chicago, living in a studio apartment above a liquor store. He was 34 years old, but looked older, with the worn-down appearance of someone carrying weight they couldn't put down. We met him at a truck stop off I-90 on a Saturday afternoon in March 2022. Jorge had convinced him to talk, but Dennis looked ready to bolt the entire time, his hands shaking around a coffee cup he never actually drank from. "Why should I trust you?" Dennis asked, his eyes darting between me and Jorge. "You could be recording this. You could be cops." "I'm not a cop," I said quietly. "I'm an attorney." Marcus Bellamy framed for ethics violations to cover his own corruption. He destroyed my career, my marriage, my life. I spent 3 years as a paralegal compiling evidence against him, and I need people like you to come forward and tell the truth. Dennis stared at me for a long moment. "You're serious? He actually framed you? Planted evidence? Filed false bar complaints? Got me disbarred? Everything I'm about to lose, I've already lost. I have nothing left except the truth, and I'm asking you to help me prove it." He was quiet, his jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't quite spit out. Finally, he gave me $75,000. Cash in a duffel bag, met me in a parking garage downtown, middle of the night, like something out of a movie. Said my testimony would save an innocent man. Said Raymond Pierce had been wrongly accused, that the police had tunnel vision, that justice required people willing to tell the truth. But Pierce wasn't innocent. No. We all knew, everyone who actually knew Ray, that he did it. His ex-girlfriend, Keisha Williams, she'd been trying to leave him for months. For months, he'd threatened her. Her family had filed restraining orders, and then she ends up dead, strangled, and suddenly Ray's got this perfect alibi because I swore we were watching basketball together. Dennis's voice cracked. I've had nightmares every night since. I see Keisha's mother in that courtroom when the verdict came down, not guilty. I see her collapse, screaming that her daughter's killer was walking free. I see Keisha's little girl, 9 years old, crying because the man who killed her mother was going home instead of to prison. "Why'd you take the money?" "Because I was broke. Behind on rent. My kid needed surgery. She was born with a heart defect, and insurance wouldn't cover the full cost. Marcus found me at the right time, when I was desperate enough to do something I knew was wrong. He's good at that. Finding desperate people and exploiting them. I understood that better than Dennis knew. Marcus had weaponized desperation. That was his specialty. "Will you testify to this?" I asked. "In court, under oath, about what Marcus paid you to do?" Dennis looked at me with eyes that held more guilt than hope. "If it means making it right, if it means stopping him from doing this to someone else, yeah, I'll testify. I'll tell everything." We found 2 more witnesses over the next 6 months. Sarah Mitchell, who'd provided false testimony in a drug trafficking case for $65,000, and James Torres, no relation to the Michael Torres whose death had driven me out of the FBI, who'd been paid $60,000 to lie about witnessing an assault. Each of them told similar stories. Marcus had found them at vulnerable moments. He'd offered money they desperately needed. He'd framed their perjury as helping innocent defendants rather than freeing guilty ones. And each of them had been living with crushing guilt ever since, watching Marcus flourish while knowing they'd helped him pervert justice. By December 2024, I had 6 years of evidence compiled in a secure storage unit I'd rented specifically for this purpose. bank records showing Marcus's cash withdrawals totaling $850,000 over 8 years, each withdrawal matching dates before major trials. Deposits into Judge Chen's wife's account totaling the same amount, offset by timing but undeniable in pattern. Testimony from 3 witnesses who'd been paid $200,000 total to commit perjury. Statistical analysis from Dr. Michael Rosen, a probability expert from University of Chicago, who calculated that Marcus's 91% win rate before Chen versus 34% before other judges was a statistical impossibility without external influence. The odds are approximately 1 in 18 million. Most damning of all, I had forensic analysis of the evidence Marcus had planted against me. A digital forensics expert named Patricia Chen, again, no relation to the judge, had examined the metadata on the fabricated emails and altered billing records. The metadata showed they'd been created months after the dates they supposedly represented. They'd been backdated using software, but digital fingerprints don't lie. Every file had markers showing when it was actually created, and every single one proved Marcus had manufactured evidence. The evidence filled 17 3-ring binders, organized chronologically and cross-referenced with an index that would have made any law librarian weep with joy. I'd spent 6 years building this case the way I'd once built murder defenses, meticulously, systematically, leaving nothing to chance. On January 15, 2025, I filed 3 actions simultaneously. First, a federal lawsuit against Marcus Bellamy for fraud, defamation, and malicious prosecution. Second, a petition to the Illinois Supreme Court for reinstatement of my law license with attached evidence that I'd been framed. Third, a criminal referral to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit with 6 years of documented evidence of judicial bribery and racketeering. The legal world exploded. The Chicago Tribune ran the story within hours. Disbarred attorney accuses former partner of frame-up, systematic judicial corruption. My name, Veronica Hayes, was suddenly everywhere again. But this time as a fighter, not a failure. Marcus issued a statement calling my claims desperate fabrications from a disgraced former attorney. His PR team went into overdrive, painting me as bitter and delusional. But the FBI doesn't open investigations based on desperate fabrications. They opened a full-scale investigation based on my evidence package within a week. My bar reinstatement hearing was scheduled for February 2025. I walked into that hearing with 6 years of paralegal work behind me, 6 years of methodical evidence compilation, 6 years of patient hunting. The hearing room was packed. Journalists, attorneys, legal scholars, everyone who'd followed my original disbarment. I sat at the respondents' table with Catherine Wu, who'd agreed to represent me again. Across from us, the bar's attorneys looked uncomfortable. They'd reviewed my evidence. They knew what was coming. I testified for 6 hours. I presented every piece of evidence: the bank records, the witness testimony, the statistical impossibility, the forensic analysis proving the documents against me had been fabricated. I showed how Marcus had accessed my computer, my files, my digital signature. I showed his motive. I'd discovered his corruption and was about to report him. The bar committee listened in stunned silence. When I finished, the chairman spoke, his voice heavy. Ms. Hayes, on behalf of this committee and the Illinois State Bar, I want to extend our most profound apologies. The evidence you've presented is overwhelming. It's clear you were the victim of a calculated fraud, and we failed to uncover it during our original investigation. Your law license is hereby reinstated immediately, with full exoneration and complete expungement of the disbarment from your record. I'd spent 6 years waiting for those words, and when I heard them, I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. Catherine squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her face. I was a lawyer again. But I wasn't done with Marcus. The FBI investigation moved quickly. Armed with my evidence, and now with federal subpoena power, they uncovered even more corruption than I'd documented. Marcus had been paying Judge Chen for 8 years. He'd bribed 2 other judges I hadn't even discovered. He'd systematically destroyed opponents through false bar complaints. I was his 4th victim. The federal trial began in June 2025. I sat in the gallery every single day, watching Marcus face the consequences of 8 years of corruption. His expensive defense attorneys tried every tactic, discrediting me as vindictive, questioning the chain of custody on evidence, arguing the statistical analysis was flawed. None of it worked. The prosecutors presented my 6 years of documentation. They called the witnesses Marcus had paid. They called Jorge Martinez, who testified about tracking Marcus's cash withdrawals. They called the forensic expert who'd proven Marcus fabricated evidence against me. And they called Judge Chen, who'd taken an immunity deal and testified that Marcus had paid him $850,000 over 8 years for favorable rulings. The most powerful moment came when I testified. The prosecutor asked about my 6 years as a paralegal, and I looked directly at Marcus as I answered. Every morning, I made his coffee. I filed his motions. I watched him on the news celebrating victories I knew were bought. And every night, I compiled the evidence that would destroy him. Because I believe in the law, I believe in justice, and I knew, eventually, the truth would matter more than his lies. Marcus's defense attorney tried to paint me as obsessed, as someone who'd manufactured evidence out of bitterness. The prosecutor's response was simple. The FBI independently verified every piece of evidence Ms. Hayes compiled. She didn't manufacture anything. She documented a pattern of corruption that this defendant spent 8 years creating. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. Marcus Bellamy was found guilty on all counts: bribery, obstruction of justice, racketeering, honest services fraud. Judge Patricia Morrison sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. All his assets were seized: the $1.2 million home, the cars, the boats, the retirement accounts. Everything he'd built on corruption was forfeited, including the law firm that still bore my name. The public exposure was beautiful. Marcus was scheduled to receive Defense Attorney of the Year at the Chicago Bar Association Gala in September 2025. He'd already given press interviews about his commitment to justice. He'd prepared an acceptance speech. Instead, FBI agents arrested him on stage in front of 300 attorneys while the award sat untouched on the podium behind him. The video went viral, not just locally, nationally. The image of Marcus Bellamy, hands cuffed behind his back, being led off stage while his colleagues watched in shock, became a symbol of justice, delayed but not denied. I held my press conference the next day. I stood behind a podium with my framed law license beside me, newly printed, with the word reinstated stamped across the top. 6 years ago, Marcus Bellamy took my career by framing me for his crimes. I spent 6 years working as a paralegal, doing work far beneath my capabilities, while he flourished on corruption. But I also spent those 6 years compiling 47 pieces of evidence, documenting every case, every bribe, every lie. Justice isn't fast, but when it comes, it's thorough. The restitution exceeded my losses. Marcus's seized assets were liquidated, $1.8 million. Judge Chen's assets added another $1.2 million. The Illinois Attorney's Fund, which compensates victims of attorney misconduct, paid me $1.5 million. The Bar Association paid $400,000 for wrongful disbarment. Total recovery, $5.2 million. It didn't erase 6 years of humiliation. It didn't give me back my marriage or my father's trust or the time I'd lost. But it meant I could rebuild. I reopened my practice in October 2025 as Hayes Ethics Defense. I specialize in representing attorneys facing false ethics complaints, the kind of weaponized accusations Marcus had used against me and 3 other attorneys he'd destroyed. I take 20 cases a year. I win most of them. And I've created something called the Bellamy Database, a system that tracks patterns of suspicious case wins and judicial rulings used by bar investigators nationwide to detect corruption before it metastasizes the way Marcus has had. My father called in November 2025. His voice was tentative, ashamed. "I should have believed you." "Yes," I said, "you should have, but I forgive you, because I know how convincing corruption can be when it's wrapped in respectability. We're rebuilding our relationship. It's slow, but then again, I'm good at slow. I teach a CLE course now, Defending the Defenders, Ethics Complaints as Weapons. I've written legal white papers about weaponized ethics complaints that have been cited in 40 cases nationwide. I'm lobbying for Illinois bar reform, requiring independent forensic review of all disbarment evidence. And every morning, I make my own coffee, in my own office, with my name on the door and my law license on the wall. Marcus Bellamy is in federal prison, serving 12 years. Judge Chen is serving 8. The 3 witnesses Marcus paid are cooperating with prosecutors and received immunity. The legal community that once celebrated Marcus now uses his name as shorthand for corruption, disguised as success. 6 years as a paralegal taught me something law school never did. Patience isn't passive. Patience is active, methodical, relentless. It's compiling evidence while you file someone else's motions. It's building a case while you make coffee. It's knowing that justice delayed isn't justice denied, it's justice earning interest. I was disbarred for crimes my partner committed. I spent 6 years making his coffee while I made his downfall. And now, every time I represent an attorney facing false ethics complaints, every time I save someone from the professional destruction Marcus weaponized, I prove something he never understood. The law doesn't belong to the corrupt. It belongs to whoever's patient enough to use it right. He won Attorney of the Year. I won my license back, my reputation back, my life back, and that victory is sweeter than any he bought.